Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez and you're listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. Today is a very unique episode of the show and it includes Eric Helms speaking to Steve Taylor and Amanda Rizo about eating behaviors in physique sport. In short, these three will talk about what this terminology even means, how eating behaviors can be addressed, why they're often ignored, what disordered eating behaviors can look like, and what can be done about it. To be more specific, you'll hear about the clinical difference between eating disorders and disordered eating, how eating behaviors are integrated with body image issues, how nutritional decisions and intake can target disordered behaviors, and how important or useful it is to seek a therapist or nutritionist when someone is struggling with these issues. Once the episode starts, you'll hear Eric give some amazing introductions and backstories as to who Steve and Amanda are as professionals and why we trust them as an integral part of our team. So sit tight for that as soon as the recording starts. But just for future reference, if you ever want to look them up online, you can just find their links to social media handles and websites in our show notes. So don't hesitate to look that up on either the 3DMJ podcast reel on our website or in your podcast app. As per usual, if you have any feedback or comments on this episode, head on over to 3dmusclejourney.com or to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/team3dmj and leave it under podcast number 117. Here is Eating Behaviors in Physique Sport with Steve Taylor and Amanda Rizo.
What's going on, 3DMJers? We have an extra special episode today. I have with me here the extended team. I have Amanda Rizo and Steve Taylor, our team mental health consultant and our team registered dietitian. So today we're going to be talking about eating behavior in physique sport. We're going to cover a fair amount of material. But first, let me just make sure you are familiar with these lovely two individuals I have with me here, because you are probably a little more familiar with just the coaches. However, we can't do what we do alone because we are not registered dietitians, we're not psychologists, we're not healthcare clinicians, or we're really just pure specialists in coaching. So to make sure that we don't go outside of our scope of practice and that we can serve our clients the best we can, we reached out to other professionals. So, Steve, you may have recognized him from, how long ago did we have you on?
About a year ago, maybe? A little over a year and a half, yeah.
I think a little over a year ago. So Steve Taylor is our RD. We had the pleasure of him interning with us for his master's, which is pretty cool. Actually got college credit. It made us feel like a legitimate company, which of course we're not, but it certainly seemed that way. But that was pretty cool. And then after that, he did such great work, and we were definitely wanted to have an RD on staff for any clinical issues with nutrition. But Steve has a master's in dietetics and nutrition and exercise physiology, is a registered dietitian. For those who don't know, that means he is able to clinically diagnose and treat nutritional related medical issues. Is that an accurate description?
That is accurate.
It's accurate enough, it sounds like?
Accurate enough.
Okay.
We could elaborate more, but for the purposes of this, it's accurate enough.
Awesome. Amanda has been part of the crew for a long time in spirit and in friendship, but is now is in a position in her career where she can be of great help to us. So she has her master's from Florida International in clinical health counseling, and she's currently working at Weber Community Center in Los Angeles, specifically doing counseling and therapy as a part of her licensure. And she is now officially our team mental health consultant. So we have multiple different ends of the spectrum of care where someone might address their eating behavior issues or at least seek help. So I think it'd be really cool for us to talk about eating behavior in physique sport, and then how it can be addressed and often how it unfortunately isn't addressed, what it looks like and what can be done about it. So with that introduction out of the way, so first I guess the question would be, is disordered eating or eating disorders, what's the difference between these two things?
I would start with eating disorders are something that are very invasive in someone's life. They're causing major issues in relationships, in their career, in school. This is just a very, very ingrained problem in their life. Whereas eating issues or disordered eating, it's an issue, but they somehow manage to cope with life.
Right.
So they're kind of just floating along.
So it's like an alcoholic or a functional alcoholic.
Functional alcoholic,
almost.
perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
And I would say the one thing also to add to that would be, if it's an eating disorder, then the issue itself is typically not food. It's they're using food as for something else, as a way to cope with something else. It's not about the food itself. That's just the vehicle. Where if it's disordered eating, it could be because of certain prescriptions they're following or certain behaviors around food or attitudes around food that are causing the disordered eating, where the eating disorder is not about food. The food just happens to be the vehicle they're using.
Okay, so that's an important distinction. So I guess what we're getting at here is that the eating disorder is a manifestation of something potentially deeper. Is that accurate in most cases?
Yes.
Okay, so cool. We can unpack that in a little bit for sure. So at least in my experience as a coach and as a researcher, I've seen statistical data, and certainly just looking at the percentage of my clients, that would indicate that there's a lot of people who compete in physique sport and also weight class restricted strength sport, and I imagine other weight class sports that I don't deal with, who do have, are on somewhere along that spectrum, or were at one point, or unfortunately might be at some point in the future. What is it about weight class restricted strength sport or physique sport that tends to either manifest that or serve as an outlet for it? What is the connection here?
I think there's multiple connections. One being that the sport itself is centered around body composition, and so weighing a certain amount and having a certain level of leanness. And so that obviously, since that is a center point, like that is going to create issues. The second thing being that this type of a sport attracts a certain type of personality to it that already exhibits certain tendencies and has certain attitudes towards things. And so it's probably a combination of those two things.
Absolutely. You would most likely see someone that is compulsive, maybe more neurotic, more organized, if you will, socially acceptable, to be more organized and competing in a weight restricted sport. Now, if we think of not necessarily a sport, what about ballerinas? What about gymnastics? That it depends on their weight and how they look. So it would really influence.
Yeah. I think about physique sports too. It's like if somebody's already struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder, it can be a good scapegoat to kind of mask that, because they can kind of get away with those habits if they can put it under the category of I'm a physique competitor, I'm a bodybuilder. Now they can kind of validate some of their behaviors, where if they weren't a competitive physique athlete, it might be a little weird. But since they say, oh, I compete in this thing, I compete in that, it's like, oh, okay, it's okay. He or she needs to do this because of this thing. So I think it can be a way to hide something or to get away with something that you normally couldn't.
Or I can't go out to this restaurant, or I can't eat with you guys. I got to stick to my Tupperware because I'm competing in next year
Right.
or in a couple of months, whatever it is.
So how often do you think, and I know that we probably can't just say in all cases, but do you think it's more so that people with, I'll just say, an unhealthy relationship with food are attracted to the sport, or that the sport causes issues with disordered eating or eating behavior problems?
I mean, that would be asking, like, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Right.
That's very difficult to answer. So it could be either or.
Right.
Or
So
both.
there are cases where either could happen.
Right.
I think that makes a lot of sense because, being the physiology guy in the room, one of the physiology guys in the room, we do know that starvation causes a biological drive towards what most would consider at least a temporary state of eating disorders. If you starve someone, they're going to binge. That's just kind of the way it works. So, and all the mental and physiological symptoms are all intended to drive someone to eat that occur from that process. But Obviously, that's not all of it, because I certainly feel like there's a lot of people who, like you said, Steve, they're drawn to the sport. So do you think it's that there's a certain personality type that's drawn to the sport, or is it just I want to do this and I need to find an outlet and this lines up with it? How conscious is that decision?
I think both.
Yeah.
Kind of like I think you see both. You see people who already have disordered eating, and this becomes a way to make that acceptable. And then you also have people who get into physique sport, lifting, losing weight, and if they take it to an extreme level, that they can kind of get stuck in places or see things differently than how they used to see them and have a hard time getting back out of that. Mm-hmm. So it's like it could create something, or it could be somebody who's already coming into it with kind of those tendencies. Right.
I also feel like, and I'd love to know your guys' thoughts on this, that certain personalities, when they're attracted to fitness, fitness becomes something that can take over their lives. Mm-hmm. I feel like that whatever that personality type is, those are the people who typically get wrapped up into it. Like they need to have like rules, guidelines, and a specific way of doing things. And now that they've decided, fitness is something that they care a lot about, they've got to dot all their I's, cross all their T's, make a system. And because fitness includes nutrition many times, especially if they're coming to it from kind of the bodybuilding angle to fitness, all of a sudden now eating is something that gets highly manipulated and controlled. And I personally see that as something that gets a lot of people into hot water. They look up one day and they realize that they're no longer eating for any reason outside of fitness. And you'll even hear like these people say this all the time, like food is fuel, or I don't think about hunger. Like it's almost a badge of honor, or like once you're a serious fitness person, this is the way you need to see it. Like food is fuel. It's here for me to perform, and I'm not going to let, it's like this food doesn't control me, I control it kind of mentality or sound. Yeah. You guys know what I'm talking about? Do you see this?
Right. It becomes more objective. Mm-hmm. Food becomes more objective, and you lose the sense of food actually being used socially, culturally, and food as being pleasurable, which it is. And in the basic biology, food is pleasurable. That's what drives us. Yep. Now, when it comes to people that start off in bodybuilding, we get so rigid in when we need to eat, how much we need to eat, and what we need to eat. It's just everything becomes so rigid and hardcore. We forget all of those other things, and that limits us. I mean, what do you see when you have clients?
I mean, I think like when you talk about like nutrition and food, like in bodybuilding, it is a lifestyle, like so it's like it's something you can't really like. It's something it's on your mind for 4 hours of the day. Like you have to eat, and so it's not like a normal sport where you can kind of put it down. You do your training for 3 hours and go home. It's like food is such an essential part of your life that it's always on your mind, and I think it happens so subtly. I think if nothing exists and kind of that person has those personality traits you're talking about, where they're perfectionistic and all those different things, and they kind of fall into learning some of the not best practices for how to manage their nutrition and food, then it can just over time kind of subtly lead them down a road that they don't even realize they're going down until one day they look up and they're somewhere they don't want to be and they don't know how to get out.
Right. Yep. I think we can all relate to that to some degree, and it unfortunately almost seems like part and parcel of if you are interested in bodybuilding, you do get to a point where there is a conflict between how you manage your nutrition for your sport, or how you think you have to manage your nutrition for your sport, and managing your nutrition for your sport, right? Yeah. Or sorry, and well, that's hard, but because it is not just like your training, that is something you're adding to your life. You're actually changing an aspect of your life. So now all of a sudden holidays are stressful. Now all of a sudden a friend who comes out of town or into town and says, "Hey, let's go grab a bite to eat," is stressful. Like I think when someone does, let's say CrossFit, it's like, so now Tuesdays and Thursdays I go to class. It's awesome. Full stop. or I joined an intramural softball league. Great. Like I might strain my knee, but when they say, yeah, I've started bodybuilding, especially if they mean competitive, or if they mean the lifestyle, like you said, that means that every meal is becoming in service of that to some degree. Whether it's as simple as I'm just seeking high protein options and making sure I have, more fruits and vegetables, great. But if it becomes something that is, all of my meals are in service of the sport or in service of my body composition goals, I think that's where you have to just be cautious, or at least self-aware,
It's so hard though, right? Because like, if you want the goal and like you're so into this stuff, and especially when you first begin, you're reinforced because you start making progress so fast at the beginning, and so you just want to like continue to make more progress and make more progress and make more progress, and it's like over time you start to add in more little rules and more little guidelines, and you're still making progress, and so it's like, well, this stuff is working, so why would I stop doing it?
Yep.
And I think it literally is like momentum that starts to pick up, that if someone isn't aware of it, or if somebody from the outside doesn't give them feedback, you're so in it that you don't really see it. I don't know.
I think that brings up another question, is where do we draw that line individually? Because where it becomes a problem for you, it might not be for me versus someone else. So is it a problem for you to bring your Tupperware in the middle of class and disturb everyone else? Is that a problem for you? Maybe not, but for everyone else it is. Is it, I don't know, we could think of also gym training. Are you skipping out on attending social events? Are you skipping out on your mother's birthday to go to the gym because you have to go? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I guess what you're saying is that it's not just the behavior, it's how does the behavior affect you and affect your life, right?
Yeah.
And I think what I see a lot of the times as a coach is, especially with younger, maybe not as socially adept clients, they're not at the point where they perceive it to be affecting them negatively, but I know that it is negatively affecting their relationships, because they have certain, like one of the most common ones is people getting annoyed that their significant others or family members are eating food around them. Like they just don't get that they've made a choice to do something, and that it's not really on anyone else's responsibility to change their behavior because they made a choice.
Yeah.
Or things that are not necessarily selfish or kind of in that, like privileged in that example, but just like you're missing out but you don't know it. Like you aren't cultivating a relationship with your family or friends. All you do is bodybuilding, and that's fine if that's all you're interested in right now, but there may be a point when that changes and now you just don't have a social support network. Or maybe you're not actively having expectations that are unreasonable of your significant other, but you're not going out to eat with them, or you're spending less time with them. You're just neglecting the relationship a little bit. That might not be a problem this week, but in a year it could. And that's always tough for me as a coach to get someone to realize that, because they're not suffering, and it's like, well, like maybe you just, is this the social life you're always going to want, or are these the things you're always going to want in your life? There might be, how do I tell someone that, in 10 years, bodybuilding might just be a part of your life, not your life? Mm-hmm. And when you get to that point, that may not be an option, or isn't easy, even it's hard to walk that back now that none of your friends are close to you, or
to rebuild some stuff that you
or
lost
that
along
you're
the way.
divorced, or whatever. So yeah, that's certainly a tough one, and knowing where to draw that line is tough. I guess from my perspective as a coach, I see it as, is there a problem, right? Like that's typically when I try to do something, and where I would reach out to you, Amanda, is if my client is saying, I'm doing X, Y, and Z, it's what I think I need to do, but it's causing, X, Y, and Z other problems. And that, I don't know, is that an appropriate time to figure out, like, this is a problem?
I would say so,
Yeah.
Especially if the individual themselves is recognizing that. That's prime time. Okay,
Right.
let's get in there. Let's see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
If they have heard their significant others, if people of importance in their lives have been telling them, like, hey, I'm over here,
Mm-hmm.
this is a problem, and they're not listening, It would be difficult for them to be receptive of receiving help.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's another fine line that needs to be drawn.
Yeah, I get it's kind of that whole thing of why interventions are hit and miss. Like, if you got everyone telling you something, you probably should. That often will be like, oh, maybe if my entire friend group thinks there's a problem, everyone I trust and love is telling me there's an issue, maybe there's an issue. But the fact that there needed to be an intervention also tells you that your coach, who you just hired online and have known for 3 months, them telling you in isolation probably isn't going to be enough.
No.
So that's why for me, it's like I have to pretty much wait until they're saying there's a problem. I can kind of poke and plant the seed and be like, consider this. But I find that some of those athletes, it never really sinks in until a few years down the track when they're starting to see the frayed edges of their social reality, crumbling, right. Before they start to realize there's actually a problem because they've been so focused on bodybuilding. So that is a tough one to know where that line is. Another question I have is how does all this tie in with body image issues? Because that's very much another prevalent thing in physique sport. Does one drive the other? Are they interrelated completely? Can you do this whole bodybuilding thing and have this not be a problem? How do you separate your self-worth from your body image, or your body image from your competitive physique image? I think that's one that I think a lot of people struggle with.
I would say, how are you talking to yourself? What is the body image that you have? What are the messages that you're saying to yourself? Are they negative or are they positive? Because you could be aware of your physique, the changes that may need to be made for your bodybuilding career. Because if it is a career, yeah, your livelihood depends on it. But it goes back to, what are you saying to yourself? If it's just being objective, okay, then that might be passable. But if you're constantly being negative, looking yourself in the mirror 20 times a day, I just don't have the right delts, or I'm not going to get this girl, whatever it may be. If it's negative, then that becomes an issue, and that's where your self-worth starts to diminish.
I think that's where the gray area falls, though, too, because it's like the whole goal of bodybuilding is to grow your delts, to grow your pecs, So it's like, on one end, it's like you can't take it to the extreme, but on the other end, that is the goal. So it's like, of course you're going to study those things. But like when you talk about I think part of your question was is it possible? And it's like, we see advanced bodybuilders all the time who've totally disassociated from like their physique. They don't think about it. It's like an object, and they can totally separate themselves from it. And so it's it's obviously possible.
Yeah,
it's
definitely. I would agree. It's just good to get the perspective on, maybe what is that allows someone to focus on their physique constantly, to try to change it, and not letting that become something negative. I guess it is the self-talk. I guess body image is not necessarily the same thing as your bodybuilding success, right? And if you're talking to if you see the value in what you've accomplished, where you've gone, what you've developed, and who you are, and you also recognize that, and I need to have a better quad sweep if I want to place higher, those can coexist.
I think one way to help yourself differentiate between the two is your emotional response to those thoughts. So if you're looking at yourself in the mirror and I just need to grow my delts, but it's not a lasting thought that causes a strong emotional response. So now you're pissed off all day. Where if you have a major emotional response because of how you're looking at yourself, then that shows there might be something going on there. Yes, I think that would kind of be something that could help people identify the kind of where they're at. Yeah.
So it's the meaning you attach to the observations you have,
right?
Not necessarily the observations themselves.
For example, let's say someone placed 14th in their class and they think to themselves, man, I brought my best physique this time around. I was way leaner. I felt great. I don't feel like I'm going to die. Or someone who placed second and said to themselves, man, I could have done better. I could have done this. I look terrible. I came in flat. Just the things. Yeah.
I'm a bad person.
I'm a bad person.
Yeah. I failed in some way. I guess if all the talk becomes negative and like you said, how do you feel? What's your emotional response? If you can't find the positive in the fact that you went through the whole process of dieting down, got on stage and improved as best you could. If there's nothing positive to come from it and it's all negative based on not meeting certain criteria, or all you can see is the negative aspects, then that's clearly a problem, because you're going to feel worse the longer you do what you supposedly love, right? So I think that's clearly an issue.
Yeah, I think, and alongside the emotional response is also, and it's kind of something you mentioned at the beginning, was like the carryover that has into other areas of your life. So it's like if your thoughts about your delts start to affect how you feel about your job or how you feel about other people or how you do everything, it's like there might be an issue. But if you can kind of compartmentalize that and like maybe use those thoughts to drive your performance in the gym or to drive that aspect, bodybuilding, but it's just like, I think it's the when that starts to bleed into other areas is also another sign. If like,
right. Is it invasive?
Yeah. It's like, is if I had a good workout, does that determine my entire day?
Mm-hmm.
But again, even then, that's like, that can still, like, I think all of us at definitely some point, like, we're there, right? Like, you had a bad workout, you're just pissed off, like.
Yeah.
So it's like, again, it's like, it's just so gray in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. So does how interrelated are body image issues with eating disorders?
I think, well, for sure, it's a clinical criteria for eating disorders, having a negative self-body image. So 100%.
Right.
I would say 100%. Now, the gray area comes in with disordered eating and just body image separately. Mm-hmm. So it's difficult to determine ultimately.
And how does it? I mean, I guess it's useful talking about a few of the different ways that this stuff can manifest. In physique competitors, pure anorexia nervosa is typically not going to be what you're seeing. Not eating at all, starving yourself. I know what I see typically is what I would describe as bulimia, I guess, or something close to it, where it's not necessarily always vomiting, but especially in that post-comp recovery period where they're trying to meet a criteria, can't, and then try to overcompensate in a cyclical fashion, either by doing a lot of exercise or going on damn near fasting protocols.
Right.
But yeah, I would guess outside of that, it's just straight up binge eating, not necessarily bulimia. Is there? It's tough to find a criteria for it, but just simply having a high level of body awareness, negative self-talk, and having binges that happen less frequently than binge eating disorder. What is that? Is that a thing, or is that just?
It would be an unspecified eating disorder. Yeah.
It's just a subclinical.
It's a subcategory.
Because that's tough. Like, how does one who's experiencing that, or a coach who is observing that, what's the best course of action there? Because I mean, it's very common for a bodybuilder who's not placing as well as they want to be frustrated. It's very common for a bodybuilder with a stubborn body part to be frustrated. And it's, like you said, we've all been there to a point where maybe that's kind of the obsession for a season or a year or a couple of years even sometimes. And then if someone is binging, once a month, should a coach, what's the duty of care there for a coach? Should we be doing something at that stage? Is it just, I think that line is something I know a lot of people probably don't know how to deal with in this specific niche of sport coaching. So what are you guys' thoughts on that?
So you're talking about how, like, as a practitioner, like in that position, what would I do?
Yeah.
My two focuses initially are the prescriptions. So it's like, what are our overall prescriptions in terms of nutrition? So what am I prescribing this person to do? And then also looking at that person's behaviors to see if, even if, let's say I have appropriate prescriptions for them, and I'm talking about, let's say, like total amount of calories or enough protein or things like that, or it's like maybe we get away from calories and we're just like doing more like feedings and things like that. Like whatever our prescription is, making sure that the way that they're organizing those prescriptions isn't setting themselves up for disordered eating.
Right.
So it's like, so looking at feeding windows and looking at all the different, all that's some of the stuff. It's the two things, prescriptions and their behaviors, how they apply those prescriptions are the two things that I look at.
Well, that's I think that's a really good, important distinction, is that as an RD on your place on like the continuum of care spectrum, if you will, you're looking at, all right, how do I get them from point A to point B with our nutrition goals? And if the current vehicle I'm using, let's say that's some protein and calories or a menu plan or whatever, if that's causing or triggering these negative thoughts and negative self-beliefs and unpleasant experiences and poor behaviors and things that are starting to cause problems in their life, all right, I can use a different vehicle. That's basically what you're saying, right? Okay, we can use feeding windows instead of macronutrients, or et cetera.
Or have I given them too low? It's even if like
just
calories
not
are
eating
appropriate.
enough.
Yeah,
Right.
did I, like looking at my prescriptions to make sure, like, okay, is this aligned with this person?
Right.
Like, are this appropriate?
Sure. So if I not provided enough mechanical satiety while we're trying to diet, or am I just simply not giving them enough food, or do we need a diet break? All those things are, I think, that makes a lot of sense. You're dealing with how does the nutrition trigger behaviors. Now, if you get to a point where you're realizing that the behaviors are not necessarily rooted in the nutrition, at what point do you refer out, or do you recognize the scope might be outside of what you do and you need someone more like Amanda to step in?
Yeah. Like I said, the two focuses for me initially are my prescriptions and their behaviors, so how they're applying those prescriptions. And so at first I might try different prescriptions. So it's like maybe at first we're trying, they're tracking all their macronutrients and it's not going very well. So we just move to calories, or we move to my different prescriptions. And once I feel like I've got that, tried everything there, and I've looked at their behaviors, are they having sufficient like carbohydrates? Are they having like a balanced diet? And just looking at all the different things. And once all that stuff is set, then I would, one thing I always look at too, like we touched at the beginning, is like why the person is engaging in certain behaviors. And if I can start to identify that stuff is not related to what we're doing, and that's kind of when I would maybe send them out to someone else.
Exactly. I was going to say the circumstances around these episodes, what's going on, what's the logistics? Are you isolating? Are you out with your family? Are you in a restaurant and you had an appetizer, an entree, a dessert, and then you went out for ice cream, whatever? That's a little more normal. Now, how frequently are they happening? What kind of distress are these episodes bringing? That's where I would go into if you were to bring someone to me. Yeah.
What I find happens all the time, though, is like stuff like that will happen, and they will be frequent occurrences. And then I take a look at the person's behavior, and it's like they're setting themselves up for that. Like they're only eating 4 hours out of the day, and like that's creating that. They don't necessarily have an eating disorder. They have disordered eating because of their behaviors. And it's like once like you get them to prolong their feeding window, or get them to eat a more balanced diet if they're tending to eliminate a certain macronutrient. Like once you kind of correct that stuff, I found a lot of the disorder eating goes away. And then if that's what I'm saying, if it doesn't go away, if we try those different things, or if I want to try different things and they're not wanting to try different things. So it's like if there's like that fear and that like, I don't need to try that, and it's like, and I've provided evidence and we've talked about how it's like, it's like this is totally like reasonable for what we're doing, and they're just not really buying into it. That's kind of when
we would have to look at the underlying issues. What are the motives?
And that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think the bodybuilding kind of evidence-based coaching community that I kind of come from and that I've grown up in and I'm a part of, we're very good at addressing disordered eating if it's caused by misinformation or misconceptions. Like if you think you can't eat carbohydrates, or that carbohydrates are the devil, and now I'm seeing you 2 years into your life being messed up because of that, then I'm going to intellectually inform you and try to combat your fear by giving you better information. Or if you have been using a system that promotes behavior that you don't like, if you're following IF religiously or alternate day fasting or carb backloading. And none of these things are inherently negative, but in many people they can lead to behaviors that end up causing problems. If you are carb cycling, I can literally endlessly list things, right?
Yeah.
So if you are being convinced that a vegan diet or a carnivore diet, all these things. So if you're restricting foods, macronutrients, times you're eating, or food combinations, man, there's an endless number of things. And if we can convince someone that they shouldn't be afraid of these foods or that they don't have to do that, great. But a lot of times you can convince them of all those things and they are still afraid. The fear doesn't go away, which often makes me think, well, there's definitely something deeper here. And like you're saying, that's the point where I feel like I don't have the tools to help the person further. Or for example, like I think it's useful to point out, like if I'm in a position, I'm the coach, and I'm dealing with someone who's in this situation, they've got all this misinformation, and I've helped them with that misinformation, and now I'm left with someone who has digestive issues, and they have problems with the way they respond to food. They seem like they have intolerances or they're allergic. Maybe they haven't eaten something in so long, or the amounts. Then yeah, that's when I would ping Steve. But if things are all sorted and they've gotten that education and they're unwilling to change their behavior, or they seem like they can't, I guess that's the point where, like you said, Amanda, you'd want to deal with underlying issues.
That's the big one. Like you said, the unwillingness to try something, the unwillingness to do something, and that underlying fear.
Right.
Because, like I said, I've worked with a fair amount of people who do have like a clinically diagnosed eating disorder or disordered eating, and as long as that awareness is already present, a lot of times we can work our way out of that. But it's at that point, whenever the awareness is not present and they still think that, that their behaviors are normal and they're not, just that they're not really, they think that what they're doing is normal, and that's when I would kind of refer them out.
Right. So it's either a lack of awareness that what they're doing is abnormal or problematic or an issue, or even an awareness of it, but fear preventing them from change. Mm-hmm. So that's where you guys deal with things from a different perspective. You're still addressing education and logistical food strategies, and maybe reframing to some degree about how you think about food, but largely based around education and knowledge and trying different strategies of manipulating your nutrition in some way, or maybe knowing when not to manipulate your nutrition.
Yeah.
But Amanda, it sounds like you're addressing things from the perspective of, well, why do you do this, and what beliefs do you have? Mm-hmm. And so talk about, I guess I would like to get some insight into if Steve or I referred one of our clients to you and they came to you and they said, hey, I'm aware that this is not necessarily the way it is, but I'm still, deathly afraid of carbohydrates, or I always find myself in a state of dieting and then I binge and then I hate myself, all the things we've all seen. Like, what is the angle that you take? What is therapy, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are extremely excited to announce that the second edition of the Muscle and Strength Pyramids has just been released, and you can get them now at 3dmusclejourney.com/pyramids. It has been 3 years since our very own Eric Helms, along with Andy Morgan and myself, released the first edition of these books, and we could not be more proud of these new upgrades. Aside from a new design, layout, and graphics to enhance the reader experience, they also include updated recommendations and values throughout the text and a load of new information. In the nutrition book, we've added a discussion about energy availability, how to determine whether to bulk or cut, how to set protein if your body fat is very high, a visual chart to help you determine hydration levels, and a new section of info regarding citrulline, malate, and glutamine. It also includes entire new chapters on making dietary adjustments and measuring progress, how to peak for both bodybuilding competitions and powerlifting meets, and the entirety of the recovery diet, so physique athletes can make the transition from the stage to a productive off-season as quickly as possible. And as for the training book, it now includes a discussion about volume being calculated as sets per muscle group, a more reactive model of deloading, a much lengthier discussion on how to handle lagging body parts, a flowchart on when to adjust volume based on all aspects of recovery, stimulus, and adaptation, a discussion on auto-regulating exercise selection, and new sections discussing drop sets, rest pause sets, and supramaximal eccentric training. It also includes sample training programs for bodybuilding and powerlifting, and Eric's new quick start guide to program building that is designed to help you integrate all of the concepts in the book into actual training programs and systems that you can use for yourself or your clients. Needless to say, this is as complete and up-to-date as possible here in 2019, and it is the exact set of principles that 3DMJ uses to coach and develop their athletes. If you'd like to learn more about these books, purchase these books, or watch the free instructional videos Eric made, which were the origins of these books, go to 3dmusclejourney.com/pyramids. That is pyramids with an S, because there are 2 books here, one on nutrition and one on training. And if you purchase the bundle of both, you get free lifetime updates. So every new edition will be automatically sent to you upon its release forever and ever. Again, that's 3dmusclejourney.com/pyramids. Thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of the show.
Well, what is therapy? I guess there's first a stigma of going to therapy in and of itself. You know, I have to have a major life crisis or an issue to go to therapy, when really it's not necessarily.
Yeah.
Really, a therapist is there to help guide you on your own. It's a collaborative process. It's not necessarily me telling you, okay, you go do this and come report back. It's us collaborating on a goal for you to have a better sustainable life. And that could look different for each and every individual. So now, as far as someone coming to me with eating issues and saying, I'm having this problem and I'm not willing to change, but I'm here, I want to talk about it. I would first initially want to see, where is this rigidity coming from? When did it start? And then we can dive into why it's happening and what we can do about it. What are you willing to do?
Yeah.
Because if the individual's not willing to do anything, then not much progress is going to be made, honestly.
How often are these things going? I mean, I think from our perspective, when we're coaching someone and focusing more on the nutrition side of things, we assume like the behavior change and the lifestyle change and what they're doing with nutrition, it's all happened since they've been interested in fitness. But what I've found is a lot of the times, if I get this information, I don't always, that if someone has gotten that information and they still have a problem or can't adopt that change, or is, fear or compulsion is preventing them from doing what would probably be best, and they're aware of it, I come to find out that there has been, they've been using food in some way to control their life going back to when they were even a child. And I think that's something we sometimes forget as coaches. It didn't all just start when they got interested in bodybuilding. Like, food has been a part of our lives since it started. And is that pretty common, that when you are at the point where they're coming to see you, that the issues with food are a lot deeper than their length of time in fitness?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's a pervasive issue. It's rooted in childhood even, and things that they learn from their parents, their mother, their father, or school friends. What kind of messages are we receiving from the media, from other people? Dieting is a huge culture in America. It's ingrained in us practically. So as far as working with the client themselves, where did they get these messages?
Where did it all start?
Where did it all start?
Yeah, I mean, I have some experience with therapy myself on the treatment side of it, not the treater, but I know that's where it's always led to, is like, what negative beliefs did I have or negative experience did I have at that time, and it's often shit that happened when I was like a single digit age that's leading to behaviors now, which is always interesting. So what treatment options does someone who is struggling with disordered eating have?
Well, you have the option of individual therapy, but I would highly recommend someone, especially with clinical diagnosis of an eating disorder, to have a multidisciplinary team, which is where Steve would come in, where a psychiatrist would come in. a medical doctor, because eating disorders, unfortunately, are one of they have the highest fatality rate of mental illness.
Wow.
So having a team work together would be the highest success rate.
So you have to deal, well, obviously, if someone's dying, then that's a physiological issue. Last time I checked my textbooks. Is that accurate?
You got that right.
Okay. We've got at least an RD and a mental health counselor agree with me on that. So I've got my facts checked. So, I mean, we know from research in anorexia has informed research in semi-starvation, which has then informed research in bodybuilding, which I think is interesting because that's essentially what we're doing in bodybuilding contest prep is we're putting the body into a semi-starved state and getting down to, ideally, depending on division, just essential levels of body fat. And we know that carries with it negative health outcomes. We see relative energy deficiency syndrome. We see potentially the female athlete triad. We see potentially losses in bone mineral density. We see drops in testosterone. We see loss of menstrual cycle. We see disrupted sleep. There's all kinds of shit that goes on physiologically. And that's prep. That's not, I'm not eating at all, and even once I've reached essential levels of body fat, I still see a ugly person in the mirror, and the only control I have is by trying to lose even more weight. That's not someone who's 5'8" and who weighs under 100 pounds. That's so just. I'm imagining just how bad it can get, and compared to a bodybuilding prep, it's even further than that, obviously. So it makes a lot of sense that you would need someone who can, potentially prescribe medication or provide true medical care. That's not just something that one person can govern if it's to the point where you're actually worried about the person's life. So what would, I guess those treatment options include a multidisciplinary approach, but what, at least from your side of it, what are the treatment options outside of individual therapy?
There's group therapy, which is a certain option.
Is that common among eating disorders, or is that?
It's not recommended.
Yeah.
It's not recommended versus addiction, where group therapy is more viable.
Yeah.
But it is an option if that's something that you prefer. Family therapy, couples therapy. You can go to conferences if you're not comfortable working one-on-one with someone.
Right.
Yeah. But I would more so recommend a mental health approach.
Right. Okay. So what does that look like in terms of how does a person who is maybe thinking about going down that road, what do they do? Like what's step one? I think a lot of people, if they want to get their nutrition sorted or their training sorted, or even if they have an injury, they potentially know who to contact, where to go. What credentials are we looking for if someone is struggling with disordered eating? Where would they find it, and what type of counselor or counseling or therapy should they be looking for? What are their options, and what would you recommend?
I would recommend certainly someone who is licensed in the field of mental health, whether that is licensed professional clinical counselor, a psychologist, licensed mental health counselor, a licensed marriage and family therapist. Those would be the licensure recommendations. Someone with a master's degree and above. You can find them in independent agencies or community-based agencies, preferably someone who has experience working with eating disorders, with depression and anxiety, because those two are usually intermingled together and they're co-occurring.
Yep.
So, yeah, those would be the recommendations.
How important do you think it is? And I guess, because I'm thinking personally here, way back in 2007, there was a point where I probably could have been diagnosed with binge eating. And if I had gone to a clinician and they had basically told me that this bodybuilding thing, man, you need to get that out of your life, I think I would have probably just found a different clinician. And or just bagged on therapy as a whole. So how important is it to go to someone who has experience working with athletes? And I guess it's the same thing. I've had clients who have had an injury, and they've been told, well, you just can't lift anymore, by what I would think is a pretty poor clinician, if that you're kind of missing one of those pillars of holistic care if you don't think at all about what drives the person and makes them happy.
Right.
Obviously, sometimes that may actually have to be the answer, but not when you've got like a knee injury or something like that.
No.
So how important is it for someone to seek a therapist who is experienced working with athletes, or ideally even, physique sport athletes?
I would say it's ideal.
Right.
It's just like an injury. You would go to someone who would help you work around the injury, not completely remove it from your life.
Right. Yep.
So, and someone who understands the field, understands the expectations, the pressures that the physique sports bring onto an individual.
Right. Is that a common thing, or is that a pretty rare clinician?
I would say pretty rare. I don't think I've encountered one on my own.
Yeah. And I mean, even among RDs, there's almost none who work with, that's not like necessarily a path. Like when you get in your RD, it's like, you can also go the physique sport path, right? No. Yeah. So I think that's because
it's becoming more popular. But.
It is. Yeah. But it is tough. Like that's one thing why I'm so grateful to have both of you, is that I know that someone needs an RD, or I know that someone needs therapy, but I'm not confident just being like, yeah, just go whoever's closest to your house. Like that's a mixed bag. Are there any other, outside of the qualifications, are there any like experience or characteristics that someone should be looking for? And is there any way to find that out? I mean, how do you vet a therapist?
Well, you can certainly ask around if anyone has heard of this person. You can ask within the field. You can ask Google. Google's great research, actually.
Are there Yelp reviews for therapists? Is
there
that a thing?
are, believe it or not.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and actually, Psychology Today is a great resource if you're looking for a clinician within your area, if you want someone
awesome,
immediate to you. To vet a therapist, you want to look for someone who provides unconditional positive regard, who wants to see you succeed, who provides empathy, who listens to you. If you're sitting with your counselor and they're taking phone calls, or
right,
they're not paying attention to you, they're not listening to you.
So if you get a consultation and you get a pretty shitty vibe, maybe that's not the one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Listen to your gut. That's a huge key, actually.
Yeah. I've only had limited experience myself being in therapy, but I've been with therapists who I really like and I trust, and I find it's a lot easier for me to be open. And I feel like nothing gets done in therapy if you can't be open, if you can't feel vulnerable, if your shields are still up, proverbially, then
right.
So it almost doesn't matter to me. Like if they're a good therapist, but you are emotionally uncomfortable, it's probably just not a good fit, regardless of how good or they aren't. If you're triggered for some reason, So that's good advice. So obviously we've talked about what qualifications, where someone can go and how to get help, but maybe before that step, or if the person isn't sure whether or not the struggles they're experiencing are due to some deep-seated issue that they should potentially explore. Maybe they are just related to what they're doing. Like, we don't know if it's chicken or egg, so why not check to see if it's the chicken or the egg? I don't know which one is correct in this metaphor, but Steve, let's talk about how one can mitigate some of the disordered eating behavior from a more nutrition side. What are some of the common things that you find yourself doing to potentially alleviate some of the neurotic behaviors or negative behaviors that stem from, or that look like disordered eating, or that are disordered eating?
Yeah, because I would say there's three main things that I look at. The first one is like the person's body composition. So is the person's body composition appropriate for their genetics, like kind of like, are they at an appropriate body comp? Second thing is, like I said, back to prescriptions. So I'll look at, prescriptions, but I'll look at, are they following a balanced diet? I find if they're trying something where they're eliminating a macronutrient, I'll try to bring them to a more balanced approach. If they're having prolonged feeding windows, I'll try to bring them to a more balanced approach to where it's like, okay, we're consuming all three macronutrients, protein, carbs, and fats. They're consuming plenty of fiber. They're eating balanced throughout the day. Like they don't have, like I said, any long periods of fasting. Other things I'll look at are because my main thing is creating sustainable behavior changes, I very rarely use, in fact, there's no one on my roster right now who's tracking all three macronutrients. So what I do a lot of times is, if somebody is doing that, another prescription thing is something that's not nearly as, doesn't take as much effort and not as rigid. So it's like if they are following all three macronutrients, well, can we just go back to calories and maybe like a protein minimum and fruits and veggies? So like those are the main prescription things I look at are like balanced diet, consuming all three macros, appropriate feeding, like spacing, not too long periods of fasting, how they're tracking things. So especially if somebody has kind of the personality traits that tends to correlate with people with eating disorders, like being perfectionistic, not giving them prescriptions that are going to fuel those tendencies.
Right.
Because if somebody's naturally a perfectionist and then you give them prescriptions that support that or that would fuel that, like if they're a perfectionist and now I'm like, hey, I want you to eat these three macronutrients within 5 grams, well, you're kind of setting that person up.
Right.
Like, so it's like, okay, well,
you're feeding the beast.
Yeah. So I try to create more flexibility in that. So like I said, go to calories, maybe it's a 500 calorie window or something. Because at this point, that's what I'm focused on is what's going to make this sustainable. But so body comp, prescriptions, and then how they're applying those things. And I kind of lost my train of thought.
You said there was those three, so you've got, and let's unpack each one of them. And unless it's the fourth, then I'm cutting you off, am I?
No.
It's those three. Okay, so for body comp, you said making sure someone's body composition is appropriate for their genetics. How is that something you evaluate? And I'm guessing you're saying, like, if someone comes to you and says, I'd like to get leaner, and you're like, you have veins in your abs, that's crazy. Is that what you mean? Or are we talking about someone trying to sustain a body comp that might work for some, but not them?
The way that I kind of assess it is, one, like, what is your food focus level right now? Mm-hmm. So what is are you focused on food throughout the day?
Right.
And once that I've determined that it's not because I'm only eating 4 hours out of the day, once all that's been taken care of and there's still food focused, well, then it's probably not sustainable for them.
Okay, so that first one is actually not the first in the order of what you're assessing, but it is if you've managed number 2 and number 3 and things haven't gone away, then maybe you're just trying to stay too damn lean.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would say even there's not even in a certain order. Like if I get, because when I work with someone, just like you get pictures. Yeah. And so it's like there are certain levels of leanness that no matter what somebody's body comp is, like they're too lean. Yeah. You know, so it's like sometimes I don't need to mess with, hey, are they eating enough carbs? And like it's just like, hey, no, they're just not eating enough.
Yeah. How did your show go this weekend? What show? Yeah, exactly.
So no. But it's kind of when it's in that gray area where it's like, okay, this person's bone structure and kind of like they're not super shredded, but they're not. It's kind of like, okay, let's get this gray area and let me ask some subjective questions. Like I said, they're focused on food, what they're currently doing with their nutrition, how they're handling their nutrition, how they're handling their behaviors around food. Yeah.
So that's cool. So there's a few things that you can look at. For one, do you have an appropriate calorie intake, food structure, food selection within your calorie range? Because obviously that can cause a problem, right? If you're eating a very low protein diet, or if there's a very high energy density but low mechanical level of satiety while you're dieting, or even if you're just trying to maintain. So things like fruits, vegetables, protein, high water content foods, fiber, all that stuff. And that makes a lot of sense. And then as far as the vehicle that you deliver those numbers, it sounds like that was number 3 on your list. Like, are you tracking that by tracking all 3 macronutrients? Are you doing that by protein and calories? Are you doing it by having a loose, repeatable meal structure, like option A, B, C for lunch, dinner, and breakfast, plus a protein shake? So once you've attended to those, that's when it becomes apparent if they're also lean, but maybe within the borderline level of that's, some people can maintain that leanness. If there's still a problem, that's when you're thinking, we probably need to put on some body weight, need some more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's where, if I get resistance to that and they're still wanting to continue dieting, and again, the fear of not wanting to try the new prescriptions or the new ways of achieving those prescriptions, that's when I would, typically refer somebody out. But if somebody is open to trying different things and they're just like, they're either have heard incorrect information, or they're already aware of what's going on and they're willing to try different things, that's where I'll use all the tools I have.
Right.
It's kind of, my main thing is like, it's when that awareness is not there. That's my main refer out is like, okay, yeah.
Right. So here's one that I get a lot. I'll talk about some of this stuff to someone and they'll say, well, it's worth it. Like it'll be apparent that they occasionally struggle with food, gain weight, and have to diet it off. But maybe 8 out of the 12 months of the year, they can maintain a lean physique, and they're making decent gains, but probably relatively poor. They get sick a little more often, and they've created the structure of eating to where they eat these massive, salads, and they're eating, all these diet foods, even though they're not trying to diet. They're maintaining body weight. And I go like, they could be better than this. You're always hungry. You're always focused on foods. And they've got, but it's worth it. Like, I like being lean. What do you do with that? I mean, I guess is it worth it? They say it is, but is there a way to, what do you do in that situation when you get that from a client? Or do you ever get that?
In those situations, like my kind of whole focus, like in this category, is kind of zooming out. So taking people through different exercises to get them to look at their life as a whole and not just the physique development aspect of it. And so if they're like, it's worth it, then, like I said, zooming out and looking at relationships and saying, hey, where do you want to be 20 years from now? Where do you want to be 10 years from now? And I have a bunch of different exercises I take people through. And a lot of times that creates awareness and they reframe things on their own once I put in new perspective for them. Yeah.
That's awesome, because I think I'll say as a coach, I often want to just reframe it for them and tell them. And that's sometimes effective, but it's obviously way more effective if they can see what you're getting at and reframe it for themselves and state, oh yeah, that is like, maybe in 10 years, this wouldn't be reasonable, or whatever the scenario is.
That's the secret of therapy. Stop giving it away.
Hey, share the secret. Like this has now become the secret therapy hacks that therapists don't want you to know. Like, so talk to us about that.
10 things
10 things therapists try to hide from you because of the pharmaceutical industry.
And then I'll put the 10 foods they can't eat.
Right. So you're the RDs who's trying to suppress what foods we can eat, and you're the therapist trying to suppress how we can heal ourselves.
Bingo.
With natural reframing. So yeah. So what does that look like what are the strategies one can use to get a different perspective on something? I guess that's because you guys are both talking about the goal is to see it differently,
yeah.
Right? To give yourself more options. What's the philosophy behind that, or some of the tools? What does that look like?
Mm-hmm. Right. So you were saying, it's all worth it. Mm-hmm. So taking a step back globally, at what cost? What are you losing in place of this lean physique? What are you sacrificing? Maybe even just write it down on a bullet point list. That these are the pros, these are the cons. Weigh each one out. And which one's more important to you? What are you losing here? Challenging negative thoughts and cognitive distortions. If you have negative beliefs, all right, what is the evidence to support it? What is the evidence to combat it? And just completely change your perspective. It's difficult because maybe for some time you've believed these negative distortions and you've considered them as facts, but reframing them and purposefully implementing them in your day-to-day life, yeah, that'll begin to ingrain.
Yeah. And I would say along those lines, like the centerpiece of my practice is my relationship with the client. Mm-hmm. So it's like making sure that rapport is there and making sure that they know that I have their best interests in mind. Mm-hmm. And so it's like once that's established and like once they know like we're on a team, I can be a little intense sometimes. Like if somebody's not seeing what it's, it's affecting all these things, because it's easy, like when you're in it, you can kind of like put stuff on the back burner. And if you don't focus on it, you don't really feel it. And so it's like what I can do is like I can ask them the question, what is this costing you? And then get them to focus on that. What is this costing you? And what else is it costing you? What else does it cost you? Mm-hmm. And if I can just hammer that questions like that, and like, again, like we have a relationship, so it's not some random person who's interrogating them.
Right.
It's like, because all my check-ins are live conversations like this, so it's in the moment and there's no editing. Mm-hmm. So I can hammer a question like that, I can go deeper and deeper and deeper, and once they realize these things, because maybe they literally don't even realize all the things that this stuff has cost them. But once someone comes along, asks them a question, and sits on that question and asks it repeatedly until they give answers, then that causes them to see it differently. Because like when I think of my check-ins, I would say I talk probably 20% of the time, and they talk 80%. And I would say of the 20% that I talk, I would say at least 50% is questions. More like 75. So like literally like that's kind of how I do things. It's a lot of listening. Like I said, they're 80%, I'm 20 on average. If it's not something where I'm trying to clear up some misinformation, it's like if it's truly a usual check-in and we're progressing along, they talk most of the time. When I talk, it's 75% questions to help them make to lead them to these new insights.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and once they've already gained these insights, that's when you can start implementing the interventions and the action part of therapy, or for you it would be behavioral changes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Once you get the client to that point.
Yeah, I think a lot of us coaches probably don't get that right enough. Where I'm saying we, not you guys, but us pure coaches who we like to know how much protein should I eat? This amount. What's the way to periodize? This amount. Here's your problem. Here's how I fixed it with this client or with myself. Maybe not realizing that those learnings are so much more powerful if they come from the person, not from the coach. And I think there's a ton of value that you don't need to necessarily be a therapist or an RD or clinician to implement this, is just to ask more questions. Because in my experience, we don't like to think about shit that conflicts with what we want to do, right?
No.
Or that's painful.
Yeah, right. Things that suck, we try to avoid or downplay if they conflict with something that we want to do currently, or believe we want to do, mm-hmm. or see as that we have to do, or see as a part of us. So if you are seeing yourself as a bodybuilder who must do X, Y, and Z, you're happy to have, you're not happy, but you're willing to ignore certain things or not focus on them or not be mindful of certain things. Mm-hmm. And having someone who can ask you and prompt you to focus on them and think about it can unlock new options. Because I think that's the big thing, is you end up walking around the eggshells of your own mental traps to try to maintain a behavior until you literally can't anymore and you start stepping on eggshells. And that's typically when, a clinician like you would get to see somebody, or you're like, hey, we really need to bring someone else in. But it's not that it's too late. It's just that things can be done way before that. As your path starts to narrow more and more and more, and bodybuilding is preventing you from having an ideal relationship or connecting with people you care about, or it's affecting your studies, or all the things we can think about, that maybe you're okay with getting B's this semester because you were dieting, or maybe you're okay with not having date night for 6 months, or all the little concessions that are common but not pathological. there are probably other options. Maybe you can't fully eat your cake and have it too, but maybe you can have a bite. You know what I'm saying? Proverbially. I think just by having someone who can ask you questions, ask what does it cost, like you said, to focus on the negatives that you've been purposely avoiding. Yeah, it's not going to feel good to focus on the negatives, but it'll allow you to actually do some problem solving.
To fix it.
Yeah, it'll give you can't fix a problem you're not aware of, and you can only have so many solutions if you're only looking out of the corner of your eye at something. So just to all the other coaches who are probably like me, where your knee jerk is to want to fix the problems for your client, or just to focus on very prescriptive, immediate responses, is to ask more questions and to get your clients to focus more on what are the parts that they're not going to focus on. So I think that's really good insight from both of you.
Yeah, and just one simple question or I guess just a simple thing someone could do with themselves is to, if they find that bodybuilding is starting to affect their life, is to sit down and write out what they want their life to look like in 10 years as a whole. What do you want it to look like? And think about that and write it out and see how little of it actually is bodybuilding. And that is just a very simple thing. And yeah.
Awesome. Anything else you guys want to bring up on this topic?
I don't know. What about you?
I think once someone has tried the different prescriptions and taken a more balanced approach and tried different application of those prescriptions, and maybe they've sought help and tried to work with someone who maybe isn't like totally to the point of a counselor or a therapist yet, and they're still not able to get out of that, we could link in the description box. There's an assessment tool, an online assessment tool that you can take, and it just is like to bring awareness. Like it's kind of like an eating disorder online assessment tool, and sometimes I'll send people to that. It's like, hey, and it'll ask questions like, do you have fear around gaining weight? How often do you have these thoughts? How often do you binge? And I think it's like 20 minutes to take it, and it can kind of give you some insight into where kind of you're at from objectively, and then from there,
right,
you seek help.
Awesome.
Right. Don't be afraid to reach out, because if you think you have a problem, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to go and check. There's nothing wrong with making sure or being too cautious.
Love it. Yeah, I know, speaking a lot to my my boys here and my fellow maybe slightly old school men, a big reframe that I did personally was seeing what do I see as being a quote unquote man. And for me, having the courage to seek help when I've been taught that seeking help is weak was really valuable. And my uncle actually did his PhD in psychology, looking at what type of reframing qualitatively do men do who have traditional male values and who have sought therapy. And a really common theme was that they realized how deathly afraid they were of quote unquote showing weakness, and how it felt quite empowering to be honest and have the integrity and the strength to share some of the deepest things and to say, hey, I've been struggling with this, and to gain that outside perspective, like almost in their own minds, strangely enough, by opening up and being vulnerable about their struggles and seeking help, it empowered them. So I think that's just something that I think is useful to look at, because I know there's a lot of people with more kind of deep-seated traditional values in bodybuilding. A lot of us are fitting nicely into those gender roles, and there's nothing wrong with that if you're focusing on the positive side of it. But if the way you're seeing yourself is preventing you from being happy, really, or being able to be who you want to be in your life, I think it's useful to really assess and ask yourself, is asking for help and is being vulnerable and honest about your emotions, is that really weak? Because I think if you really ask yourself it, you might not think it is. And there's a lot of value there. I know it's definitely been a huge positive change in my life. So I just want to say thank you to you both for what you do and for being on the team, and thank you for your input on this podcast.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I have one last thought.
Yes, please.
Yes. Cause I think about it and like the stuff we covered, and because of the nature of the sport, like I don't want people to listen to this and everyone thinks they have an eating disorder.
Yeah, I was thinking.
You know what I'm saying? I'm like, wait a minute, we should probably
everyone's messed up.
Like,
Here's the backpedaling part of the podcast now.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's the disclaimer. So I think, so the first thing you would do would be don't create a thing if a thing doesn't exist. So trying some of the, because it's like, it could be easy to listen to this and like, shoot, I have some of these binging behaviors, or shoot, I have some of these thoughts around, I don't like the way I look, but it's like, they're still engaging in prescriptions or behaviors that fuel that stuff. Mm-hmm. So I would say like, that would be the first place to start, would be to start trying some of this stuff out and seeing if that helps. And then if it doesn't, that would be when you reach out. Cause we both know, we all know that like, the sooner you can get assistance with an eating disorder, the better the recovery.
The more success.
So it's like you don't want to put it off, because that just makes the process that much harder.
Yes.
But it's also like you don't want to jump the gun and create a thing when a thing doesn't exist. So it's like start with level 1, and before you create a mountain out of a molehill, it's okay. Like, what are my prescriptions? What are my behaviors? Where's my body comp at? Let me take a more balanced approach. Let me spread stuff out. Okay. And then looking at your thoughts. Am I having a strong emotional response to my thoughts? Is this bodybuilding bleeding into every area of my life? And then from there, if it's just like, you're still having those negative thoughts, then maybe taking that assessment tool, which we're going to link in the description box. And then from there, seeking assistance.
No, that's a really good thing to point out. And I think so much of the time and energy and content we put out as 3DMJ as a whole is to help deal with this stuff on the front end. It's to take away fear-based food decisions, to have the amount of structure that's appropriate, not excessive, to get in shape. The amount of precision, accuracy, and control that's appropriate for the sport to get in shape, and not more. Dieting in a sustainable fashion. All the quantitative prescriptive stuff we put there to balance being optimal with also being sustainable. That's my big thing, is sustainable performance. Like, here's a sustainable behavior change. I want someone to have a 30-year-long contest career in their given sport of choice, which simply doesn't happen if you don't do that, right? You can be successful for 2-3 seasons before things really start to fall apart emotionally or physiologically. So we deal with that a lot on the front end here at 3DMJ, and we also talk about just the mentality, like seeing yourself as someone who bodybuilds, not just purely a bodybuilder. And all the little quotes that we've had floating around for 10 years, like I'm Eric the bodybuilder, and I'm Eric and I bodybuild, not I'm Eric the bodybuilder, or Berto's classic quote of, diversify your happiness portfolio, or Jeff just talking about balance and priorities and the grays. All of these things, I think we try to instill that mentality. And for the most part, I think people, when they come to the sport with the right mentality, and with a clean slate, let's say they're not having issues from when they were children or teenagers related to body image or disordered eating, it seems like most people do okay. Mm-hmm. They have the same struggles we all do, right. Dieting down to the point where you are physiologically starving, and you have to learn how to transition between that and regular life, and it's by no means easy. But don't think just by participating in a powerlifting meet where you had to cut a couple kilos in the last 2 weeks, or by doing your first show, that you therefore must have an eating disorder.
You have one binge.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're also 7% body fat and you have one binge. Like, that's normal behavior.
Absolutely normal. Well said. So I guess this podcast, just so everyone understands, is to address the fact that there's a large percentage of people who do struggle with true eating disorders and body image issues in the sport, but that doesn't mean that's everyone. It is a large percentage, but it's not even a majority. No. And especially not among those who are doing things right. So we just want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence in providing information and talking about what is often not talked about, so that people know they have options, they have support, people do understand, and that there are pathways and avenues to get help.
Absolutely.
And we're going to end on Rizo saying absolutely.
Absolutely.
Hey everybody, it's Eric Helms. Thanks for tuning into our podcast. As you know, at 3DMJ, we promote evidence-based approaches to the lifting community. If that's something you want to dive deeper into, I'd encourage you to check out my research review, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport, or for short, MASS. This is a review that myself, Dr. Mike Zerdos, and Greg Knuckles put out every month. We cover the latest research publications that are applicable to strength and physique athletes, or anyone who's looking to get stronger or improve their body comp. Our content is in both written and video format. For more information on how to subscribe, check out 3dmusclejourney.com/mass. That's 3dmusclejourney.com/MASS for further details. Thanks for tuning in.